Sarah Williams sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of her mother's belongings. The funeral had been 3 days ago, and now came the difficult task of sorting through a lifetime of memories. Her mother, Margaret Williams, had lived in this small house for 47 years, and every corner held traces of her presence. The afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains as Sarah opened another cardboard box. Inside, she found her mother's collection of recipe cards, faded photographs, and at the bottom, something that made her pause. It was her mother's old Bible, the one with the worn leather cover that Margaret had carried to church every Sunday for as long as Sarah could remember. Sarah lifted the heavy book carefully. The leather was soft and weathered, darkened by years of handling. As she opened it, she noticed something unusual. Between the pages of Psalms, there was a slight bulge. Curious, she turned to the marked page and found a folded piece of paper tucked inside. The paper was old and yellow, different from anything she had seen before. It felt thicker than regular paper, almost like parchment. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The writing was in her mother's handwriting, but it looked much younger, more hurried than the careful script she remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists. The note was addressed to someone called Chief Running Bear, and it was dated September 15th, 1967. Sarah's eyebrows furrowed. Her mother would have been 22 years old then, just a year older than Sarah was now. But who was Chief Running Bear? Her mother had never mentioned anyone by that name. Sarah read the note again, more carefully this time. The words spoke of love, of promises made under starlit skies, and of a secret that had to be kept. There were mentions of meetings by an old oak tree near the reservation boundary, and of plans to run away together. But most shocking of all was the final paragraph, where her mother wrote about being pregnant and needing to tell the chief about their child. Sarah's mind raced. She had always believed her father was James Williams, the man who had raised her and loved her as his own. James had died when Sarah was 15. And her mother had never remarried. But this note suggested a completely different story about Sarah's origins. The handwriting became more frantic toward the end of the letter. Margaret wrote about pressure from her family, about threats and warnings to stay away from the reservation. She mentioned her father's anger and her mother's tears. The final lines spoke of a decision that was breaking her heart, but that she felt she had no choice but to make. Sarah sat back on her heels, the note clutched in her hands. 23 years of her life, and she was just now learning that everything she thought she knew about herself might be wrong. The man she had grieved as her father might not have been her biological father at all. And somewhere out there, possibly still alive, was a man named Chief Running Bear who might be her real father. She looked around the room with new eyes. Had her mother kept this secret all these years? Had James known the truth? Sarah thought about her appearance, how she had always been taller than her mother, with darker hair and eyes that seemed almost black in certain light. People had sometimes commented that she didn't look much like either of her parents, but Sarah had never thought much of it. Now she wondered if those differences were clues she had missed her entire life. She thought about her love of nature, how she felt most at peace when hiking in the mountains or sitting by streams. She remembered her strange dreams as a child, dreams of vast plains and horses running free, dreams that seemed too real to be just imagination. Sarah carefully folded the note and placed it back in the Bible. She needed to learn more about this Chief Running Bear and the reservation her mother had mentioned. She needed to understand what had happened in 1967 that had forced her mother to make such a painful decision. That evening, Sarah drove to the local library. She spent hours searching through old newspapers and records, looking for any mention of Chief Running Bear or nearby reservations. Finally, in a newspaper from 1968, she found what she was looking for. There was an article about the Pine Ridge Reservation, located about 3 hours north of her town. The article mentioned several tribal leaders, including a young chief named Running Bear, who was working to improve conditions on the reservation. The black and white photograph accompanying the article showed a tall, handsome man with long, dark hair and piercing eyes. Sarah stared at the image, searching for any resemblance to herself. The man in the photo would have been in his late 20s then, about the right age to match the timeline in her mother's letter. Sarah made copies of the article and drove home with her mind spinning with questions. She spent the next several days researching everything she could about Pine Ridge Reservation and its history. She learned about the struggles of the Native American community in the 1960s, the poverty and discrimination they faced, and the barriers that existed between their world and the white communities surrounding them. She began to understand why her mother's relationship with Chief Running Bear would have been controversial, perhaps even dangerous. In 1967, interracial relationships were still taboo in many parts of the country, and the divide between Native American communities and white settlers ran especially deep. But Sarah also felt a growing anger that her mother had never told her the truth. She had a right to know who she was and where she came from. She had a right to know about her heritage and her biological father. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became to find Chief Running Bear and learn the whole story. A week after finding the note, Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. She packed a small bag, took a leave of absence from her job at the local bank, and prepared to drive to Pine Ridge Reservation. She had no idea what she would find there, or even if Chief Running Bear was still alive, but she knew she had to try. Before leaving town, Sarah stopped by her mother's grave. She knelt beside the headstone and spoke quietly to the woman who had raised her with such love but had kept such an enormous secret. "Mom, I found your note," she whispered. "I don't understand why you never told me, but I'm going to find him. I'm going to find my father and learn the truth about who I am." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, as if her mother was trying to send her a message. Sarah stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked back to her car. The drive to Pine Ridge would take 3 hours, and she wanted to arrive before dark. As she drove north on the highway, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and excitement. She was about to embark on a journey that could answer questions she had carried her whole life without even knowing it. But she was also terrified of what she might discover. What if Chief Running Bear didn't want to meet her? What if he denied everything? What if he had died years ago, taking the truth with him to his grave? The landscape changed as she drove further from town. The rolling farmland gave way to rougher terrain, with rocky outcroppings and patches of prairie grass. Sarah had never been to this part of the state before, but something about it felt familiar, as if she was coming home to a place she had never been. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sarah saw a sign ahead, Pine Ridge Reservation, 5 miles. Her heart began to pound. In just a few minutes, she would be in the place where her story had truly begun, where her mother and father had fallen in love under those starlit skies mentioned in the letter. Sarah pulled over to the side of the road and took the letter from her purse. She read it one more time, drawing strength from her mother's words of love and hope, even in the midst of such difficult circumstances. Whatever had happened between her parents, whatever had forced them apart, Sarah was determined to honor both of their memories by seeking the truth. She folded the letter carefully and put the car back in drive. The reservation was waiting, and with it, hopefully, the answers she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. The Pine Ridge Reservation looked different than Sarah had expected. Instead of the stereotypical images she had seen in old Western movies, she found a community that was both struggling and vibrant. There were modest homes, some well-maintained and others in need of repair, scattered across rolling hills. Children played in yards while adults gathered on porches in the cool evening air. Sarah drove slowly through the main area, unsure of where to go or who to ask about Chief Running Bear. She spotted a small community center with lights on inside and decided to start there. As she parked her car, she noticed several people watching her curiously. She was obviously not from the reservation, and her presence was drawing attention. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked toward the community center. The building was simple but welcoming, with handmade decorations and notices about upcoming events posted on the walls. As she approached the entrance, an elderly woman emerged. The woman was small and weathered, with long grey hair braided down her back and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore a colorful shawl over a simple dress and moved with the careful grace of someone who had lived many years and learned much wisdom. "You look lost, child," the woman said in a gentle voice. "Can I help you find something?" Sarah felt suddenly nervous. How did you explain to a stranger that you were looking for a man who might be your father based on a letter you found in your dead mother's Bible? "I'm looking for someone," Sarah began hesitantly. "A man named Chief Running Bear. I have reason to believe he might have known my mother many years ago." The elderly woman's expression changed immediately. Her eyes widened and she studied Sarah's face more carefully, as if seeing her for the first time. "Chief Running Bear," the woman repeated slowly. "That name hasn't been spoken around here for a long time. What was your mother's name, child?" "Margaret," Sarah answered. "Margaret Williams." She would have been here in 1967. The woman gasped and took a step backward. She continued to stare at Sarah, her eyes moving from her face to her hair to her eyes, as if she was seeing a ghost. "Margaret," the woman whispered. "Little Margaret with the golden hair and the sad blue eyes. Oh, child, you have her face but his eyes. Come with me. There are people you need to meet." Sarah followed the woman, whose name was Anna Crowfeather, into the community centre. Inside, several people were gathered around tables, some playing cards, others just talking. The conversation stopped when Anna led Sarah into the room. "This is Margaret's daughter," Anna announced to the group, "the one we always wondered about." An older man with long grey hair and weathered hands looked up from his card game, his eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You're sure?" he asked Anna. "Look at her, Joseph. Look at those eyes. Those are Running Bear's eyes." The room fell silent. Sarah felt like she was in the middle of something she didn't understand, surrounded by people who knew more about her story than she did. "Where is he?" Sarah asked quietly. "Where is Chief Running Bear? I found a letter from my mother, and I need to know the truth." The silence stretched longer, and Sarah began to fear the worst. Had she come all this way only to learn that her father was dead? Finally, Joseph spoke. "Running Bear is alive, but he's not the same man he was in 1967. The years have been hard on him. He lives alone now, up in the mountains about 20 miles from here. He doesn't come down to the reservation much anymore." "Why?" Sarah asked. "What happened to him?" Anna sat down heavily in a chair and motioned for Sarah to sit beside her. "Child, there's a lot you need to know about what happened between your mother and Running Bear. It wasn't just a simple love story that ended sadly. There were forces at work that destroyed something beautiful and left scars that never fully healed." Over the next hour, Anna and the others told Sarah a story that was both more wonderful and more tragic than she had imagined. They told her about the summer of 1967, when her mother had come to work as a volunteer teacher at the reservation school. Margaret had been fresh out of college, full of idealism and hope about making a difference in the world. Running Bear had been 26 then, newly appointed as chief after his father's death. He was intelligent and passionate about his people, working tirelessly to improve conditions on the reservation. He was also incredibly handsome, with a presence that commanded respect from everyone who met him. The attraction between Margaret and Running Bear had been immediate and powerful. Despite the cultural barriers and the disapproval of both communities, they had fallen deeply in love. They met in secret, usually at an old oak tree that grew near the boundary between the reservation and the neighboring farmland. "Your mother was different from other white people who came here," Anna explained. "She didn't just want to help from a distance. She wanted to understand our ways, to learn our language and traditions. Running Bear taught her about our ceremonies and our connection to the land. She taught him about books and poetry and the world beyond the reservation." But their happiness was short-lived. Margaret's father, a prominent businessman in town, discovered the relationship and was furious. He threatened to disown Margaret and to use his influence to cut off funding to the reservation if she didn't end the relationship immediately. At the same time, some members of the tribal council, led by Running Bear's own uncle, were pressuring him to focus on tribal matters rather than pursuing a relationship with a white woman. They argued that such a relationship would bring negative attention to the reservation and jeopardize their efforts to gain federal recognition and funding. The pressure from both sides became unbearable, Anna continued. But they loved each other too much to give up easily. That's when they made the plan to run away together. Sarah listened with growing sadness as Anna described how her parents had planned to leave together and start a new life somewhere far away where their love wouldn't be seen as scandalous or wrong. They had chosen a date in late September 1967 and had made all the arrangements. But a week before they were supposed to leave, everything fell apart. Margaret's father hired private investigators to follow his daughter. They discovered the plan and the meeting place. On the night Margaret and Running Bear were supposed to run away together, they were waiting. "Your mother was taken back to town by her father's men," Anna said sadly. Running Bear was beaten and warned never to contact her again. He was told that if he tried to find her, both Margaret and the reservation would suffer consequences. Joseph picked up the story. Running Bear was devastated, but he thought Margaret had simply changed her mind about running away with him. He didn't know about the threats or the violence. All he knew was that she didn't show up that night, and he never heard from her again. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she began to understand the tragedy that had separated her parents. So neither of them knew what really happened to the other? Not for many years, Anna confirmed. Running Bear spent months trying to find out what happened to Margaret, but he was always told she had left town and didn't want to be contacted. Margaret, meanwhile, was essentially held prisoner by her family until they could arrange a quick marriage to James Williams. James Williams, Sarah repeated. The man I thought was my father. He was a good man, Joseph said gently. He knew the truth about your parentage, but he loved your mother and agreed to raise you as his own. He never treated you as anything less than his daughter. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the story. Her mother had been forced into a marriage to protect both Sarah and Running Bear. James Williams had agreed to be part of this deception out of love for Margaret. And Running Bear had spent all these years believing that the woman he loved had simply abandoned him. Does he know about me? Sarah asked. Does Running Bear know he has a daughter? Anna and Joseph exchanged glances.
We suspected, Anna admitted.
When Margaret left town so suddenly and then returned a few months later married to James Williams, some of us wondered. But we were never sure, and Running Bear was too heartbroken to pursue the matter. He needs to know, Sarah said firmly. I need to tell him who I am. Child, Anna said gently, you need to understand that Running Bear is not the same man your mother knew. The loss of her love combined with years of fighting for our people and facing disappointment after disappointment changed him. He's become bitter and isolated. He may not welcome this news the way you hope he will. But Sarah's mind was made up. She had come too far and learned too much to turn back now. She needed to meet her father and tell him the truth, regardless of how he might react. Will you help me find him? She asked. Anna was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll take you to him tomorrow. But promise me you'll be prepared for any reaction. Running Bear has lived with pain for so long that he may not know how to feel joy anymore. That night, Sarah stayed in a small guest house on the reservation. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the incredible story she had learned. Her mother had sacrificed her own happiness to protect both Sarah and Running Bear. James Williams had given up his own chance at a traditional family to help a woman he loved, and Running Bear had spent decades believing he had been abandoned by the one person who truly understood him. Tomorrow she would meet her biological father for the first time. She would hand him the letter that would explain everything and finally give him the truth he had been seeking for 23 years. Sarah just prayed that it wouldn't be too late to heal the wounds that had been festering for so long. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sarah woke before sunrise, too nervous to sleep any longer. She dressed carefully and made sure the letter was safely tucked in her jacket pocket. Anna Crowfeather was waiting for her outside the guest house with an old pickup truck. The drive into the mountains was quiet, except for the rumble of the truck's engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. Anna navigated winding dirt roads that seemed to lead deeper and deeper into wilderness. Sarah wondered how anyone could live so far from civilization. He built his cabin himself about 15 years ago, Anna explained as they drove. After his wife died, he couldn't bear to stay in their old house on the reservation. He said he needed to be closer to the spirits of his ancestors. He was married? Sarah asked, feeling a strange pang of disappointment. Yes, to a good woman named Mary Stands Tall. They had 2 sons, but both were killed in a car accident in 1995. Mary died of grief a year later. That's when Running Bear withdrew from the world completely. Sarah felt her heart break for this man she had never met. He had lost not only her mother, but also his wife and children. No wonder he had become isolated and bitter. After an hour of driving, Anna turned down an even narrower path. Through the trees ahead, Sarah could see smoke rising from a chimney. Her pulse quickened as they approached a small log cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. The cabin was simple but well built, with a wide porch and windows that looked out over the valley below. Firewood was stacked neatly beside the door, and Sarah could see a vegetable garden and what looked like a workshop behind the main building. Anna parked the truck and turned to Sarah. Are you ready for this, child? Sarah nodded, though her heart was pounding so hard she was sure Anna could hear it. They walked up to the porch together, and Anna knocked on the wooden door. Running Bear, it's Anna Crowfeather. I've brought someone to see you. They waited in silence for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, the door opened slowly. The man who stood before them was tall and still, imposing despite his 61 years. His hair was completely grey now and hung loose around his shoulders. His face was weathered and lined, marked by years of pain and solitude, but his eyes were exactly as they had appeared in the old newspaper photograph, dark and penetrating. Those eyes fixed on Sarah immediately, and she saw recognition flicker across his features. His mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "Hello," Sarah said quietly. "My name is Sarah Williams." "I think you knew my mother." Running Bear continued to stare at her without speaking. His eyes moved over her face, taking in every detail as if he was trying to memorize her features or convince himself she was real.
May we come in?
Anna asked gently. "There are things that need to be said." Running Bear stepped back and motioned them inside. The cabin was surprisingly warm and comfortable. Native American artwork hung on the walls, and handmade furniture filled the living space. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the room. Running Bear gestured for them to sit on a wooden couch covered with colorful blankets. He remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest as if protecting himself from whatever they were about to tell him. "Who was your mother?" he asked finally, his voice rough from disuse. "Margaret," Sarah said simply. "Margaret Williams." The effect was immediate and devastating. Running Bear's knees buckled slightly, and he reached out to steady himself against the wall. His face went pale, and for a moment Sarah thought he might collapse completely. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Margaret left. She chose someone else. She didn't want. She never left by choice." Sarah interrupted gently. "She was forced to leave, and she never stopped loving you." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. Her hands were shaking as she held it out to him. "She wrote this for you in 1967. I found it in her Bible after she died 3 weeks ago." Running Bear stared at the letter as if it were a poisonous snake. For a long moment he didn't move to take it. Then slowly, he reached out and accepted the folded paper. His hands, Sarah noticed, were also shaking as he unfolded the letter. As he began to read, his breathing became more labored. Halfway through, he sank into a chair, his eyes never leaving the page. Sarah watched his face as he read her mother's words of love and explanation. She saw anger flash across his features when he read about her family's threats, saw pain when he came to the part about the baby, and saw something like wonder when he reached her mother's final declaration of love. When he finished reading, Running Bear sat in complete silence for several minutes. The letter hung from his fingers as if he had forgotten he was holding it. "She was pregnant," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "She was pregnant with me." Running Bear's eyes snapped up to meet hers. For the first time since she had arrived, he really looked at her, not as a stranger who reminded him of someone he had lost, but as his daughter. "You," he breathed, "you're my child." Sarah nodded, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "I'm your daughter. I'm 23 years old. And until 3 weeks ago, I didn't know you existed." The silence that followed was profound. Anna Crowfeather quietly excused herself and stepped outside, leaving father and daughter alone to process this life-changing moment. Running Bear stood up slowly and walked to the window. His back was to Sarah as he spoke. "All these years, I thought she had simply decided I wasn't worth the trouble. I thought our love meant nothing to her compared to the comfort and safety her family could provide." "She never stopped loving you," Sarah said softly. "Anna told me she was forced into marriage with James Williams to protect both you and me. She kept your letter hidden all these years because it was the only piece of you she had left." Running Bear turned around, and Sarah was shocked to see tears streaming down his weathered face. "I have a daughter," he said wonderfully. "Margaret gave me a daughter." Sarah stood up and took a tentative step toward him. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have your own life and your own grief to deal with. I'm not asking you to suddenly become a father to me. I just wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know that you were loved and that you have family." But Running Bear was shaking his head. "No," he said firmly. "You don't understand. For 23 years, I have lived with a hole in my soul. I lost Margaret, then I lost Mary and my boys. I thought I was alone in this world, that my bloodline would die with me." He walked towards Sarah, his steps becoming more confident with each word. "You are not asking me to become a father. You are telling me that I already am one. You were telling me that the love I shared with Margaret created something beautiful and lasting." When he reached her, Running Bear hesitated for just a moment. then gently placed his hands on Sarah's shoulders. Up close, she could see that his eyes were exactly like her own, dark and deep with flecks of gold. "My daughter," he said, and the words seemed to unlock something that had been frozen inside him for decades. "My beautiful daughter." Sarah threw her arms around him, and they held each other tightly. Two people who had been missing pieces of themselves their entire lives finally feeling complete. Over the next several hours, Running Bear and Sarah talked about everything. He told her about her mother's time on the reservation, about their secret meetings and shared dreams. He shared stories about their walks under the stars and their plans for the future. Sarah told him about her life, about the man who had raised her with such love despite knowing she wasn't his biological child, about her mother's final years, and about finding the letter that had led her here. As the sun began to set, Anna returned to the cabin. She found father and daughter sitting by the fire, Sarah's head resting on Running Bear's shoulder as he told her about the traditional ceremonies and customs of their people. "You look different," Anna observed to Running Bear. "You look like yourself again." Running Bear smiled, the first genuine smile Anna had seen from him in years. "I feel like myself again. I have my daughter back. I have Margaret's daughter." Sarah looked up at her father. "What happens now?" "Now," Running Bear said, "you learn about who you really are. If you want to, I'll teach you about our traditions, our language, our connection to the land that your mother loved so much. You'll meet your cousins and aunts and uncles who have wondered about you for 23 years. And," he added, his voice thick with emotion, "we'll honor your mother's memory together. We'll make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She had come looking for answers and had found not just a father, but an entire heritage and identity she never knew existed. 3 months later, Sarah had moved to a small house just outside the reservation. She was learning the Lakota language and participating in traditional ceremonies. Running Bear had come back to the community, his isolation ended by the joy of rediscovering his daughter. Together they planted a tree near the old oak where Running Bear and Margaret used to meet. It was a memorial to Margaret and to the love that had created Sarah, and to the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. Sarah often thought about her mother and the incredible sacrifice she had made. Margaret had given up her own happiness to protect both the man she loved and the child they had created together. But in the end, love had found a way to survive and flourish, bringing together a father and daughter who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control. The hidden note in Margaret's Bible had revealed more than just a secret romance. It had uncovered a story of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that connect families across time and distance. And in finding her father, Sarah had also found herself.